So in this video, I want to talk just a little bit about my overall impressions of my childhood. As I said before, I was born in 1958, and my earliest memories actually go back to when I was about 3 years old. So that would be about 1961. And I lived actually a lot of different places in my life, even as a child. So I was born in Louisville, Kentucky. And by the time I was 3, I was back in Louisville, although I had lived in Dayton, Ohio for a couple years before that, but I don't really remember that. And my parents had gotten divorced, and I was living with my mother and my brother in my grandparents' house with two of my aunts who were still at home. And then when I was 5, my mother remarried, and the person who she married, my stepfather, really became my father for all intents and purposes. And at that time, when I was 5, we moved to Frankfort, Kentucky, and a year later we moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and a couple of years later we moved to Evansville, Indiana. So I was about 10 in 1968 when we moved to Evansville, and I was there until I graduated from high school in 1975. So most of my childhood was in Evansville, Indiana, although very significant emotional ties and lots of visits to Louisville, Kentucky, where my extended family lived. Um, what are some of the overall impressions I have from my childhood? I think maybe one of the big ones is the idea, both in Louisville and Evansville, of neighborhood children going outside and doing things together on a pretty much daily basis. So we weren't indoor very often. We spent a lot of time outside. We played games. We tooled around the neighborhood. We explored construction sites. I remember that there was a lot of development going on in the mid 1960s, and I've talked to other people my age, and they have similar memories of playing games in foundations of apartment building structures and things, which probably was horribly dangerous, but it just seemed exciting to us at the time. I remember when we wanted to, do something special, we might get on our bicycles and ride to the swimming pool in the summer. We might just get on our bikes and ride around to different friends' houses. We might go bowling at the local bowling alley, so that was something that we did for fun. Um, Sometimes we played board games, both with the kid friends and also in my bigger family. So that might be Monopoly, it might be Scrabble, that kind of thing. So what didn't we have then? Of course, no cell phones. We had a TV. I think I was 5 when we got our first television. It was black and white. My recollection is my parents bought it when John Kennedy was assassinated because they wanted to watch the funeral on TV, and it was a tiny little TV, black and white. I don't think we ever had a color television all the way up through when I graduated from high school. Later, my parents got one, but it was black and white TV pretty much all the way. I don't remember talking much to friends on the phone. That wasn't, every once in a while, but that wasn't really a thing. Um, and when we talked to family who lived out of state, it was long distance, and you paid a certain amount for the first 3 minutes. So I remember shorter conversations from that point of view. What else do I remember about my childhood? My dad was a librarian, and he was always bringing home books, so I read constantly. And that was probably the main thing I did sort of for fun. My parents got the New Yorker magazine, and I used to read the cartoons first, and then movie reviews. I remember when I was in middle school and high school, and occasionally one of those really long New Yorker articles. I can remember being up at night. My parents would have friends over for what my mother would have called a dinner party. And they had these little plates where you could put a cake and a cup of coffee on it. And they would sit in the living room and have these long conversations about politics, about the Vietnam War, about just sort of the issues of the day. They were both academics, so it might be about poetry or theater or any number of things. And I can remember sort of scrunching down the hall and listening in and thinking, that's what I want to do. I want to have these long, fun conversations. So that was, those are some of the more positive things I remember from my childhood. I also remember some pretty negative things. My dad was alcoholic, and there were sometimes violent encounters in the middle of the night, and what we would today call domestic violence, but I don't really think there was that label was around when I was a kid. I do remember worrying that somebody would find out, and because I didn't want my family to be disrupted, and so that was a concern. Oddly, that was the worry, right? And So that was kind of a cloud, over the family. I had a really sort of deep and wonderful relationship with my grandparents, and I remember spending lots of summers for months with my grandparents, um, and my aunts, and just I remember we used to sew things. One summer, we all took a stretch and sew class, my Aunt Kathy and I, and we made T-shirts for everybody. One year, we went on a vacation. I went with my Aunt Kathy and Uncle Frank and my grandmother to Georgia to the beach. And, that was a big deal because we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, and we didn't really take very many vacations. Um, I can remember a vacation we took to Atlantic City when I was about 13. And other than that, I don't actually remember any other vacations I took during my childhood. Um, I remember money was very tight, and I can remember my mother having my brother and I sort of look for bottles and cans to try to round up change because there were deposits, and if you took them in, you'd get some money. I can remember her having insufficient funds on checks and having to go into the grocery and trade out that, pay for the bouncing check. We just didn't have very much money. Um, and so that was kind of, I guess, the negative. I don't really remember sort of wishing for something in particular if we had had more money, other than maybe traveling. And a lot of the books I read took place in other countries or other places. I remember reading a book about the United Nations one time and saying, "Oh, I want to be a translator at the UN," and then realize, come to find out, you had to be born bilingual, and so that job career went out the window. But I really wanted to travel, and so that was a big deal. And then high school, I just remember working my tail off with my academics, taking lots and lots of courses. I was very interested. I actually one semester didn't have any lunch because there was several courses I wanted to take, and I was getting ready to go to college. And for me, going to college was getting away, building a different life. I wanted something with travel. I wanted something politically different. One big hallmark of my childhood was a very divided sort of political environment. And we were living in Southern Indiana, and we were sort of liberal, democratic family, and we were surrounded by people who voted Republican and who said things that I thought were inappropriate. And so I was dying to get away and be more surrounded by people that I felt like would be more like me. Um, I think the other big different thing about my childhood that I can remember is that religion was a really big part of the cultural fabric, although not so much the household I grew up in. My parents we attended an Episcopal church, but we didn't go very often. And there were a lot of sort of evangelical conversion kinds of things. I can remember a couple of assemblies that's in my public high school. that were really somebody came to give a speech, and but they were really an evangelist. And if you went to the thing at night, they tried to save you. And I'm really feeling kind of like I don't think they should be doing that in a public school. It made me feel very out of place. The role of religion in the schools. I always felt it made me feel isolated, like I was different from everybody else. So that's something that I remember also from growing up. So those are just some of my feelings or impressions, I guess you would say, of my childhood. And I'll talk more about some other things on another video.